Well, I hoped you liked that dramatic opening title music, because we are talking about a dramatic test series. Welcome to 2005, the Greatest Ashes series, with me, Simon Hughes.
And I'm Simon Mann.
And we're going to recap the drama of that epic Ashes series 20 years ago with our own memories of it, with some clips of some of the memorable moments, and of course, hearing from the heroes who played such an integral part in that incredible test series. And here are two who've played a big role in Ashes series over the years. You'll recognise the two names, Shane Warne and Stuart Broad. Here they are talking about the importance of the Ashes.
You can make a name, no matter how bad you do against anyone else or how well you do. If you do well in the Ashes series for England and Australian players, you can put yourself on the map. It's sort of a career. You make a career out of how you do in the Ashes.
It's rivalry, it's history. I suppose what I've been brought up on is my heroes and the players I particularly admire as a youngster are people that have delivered in Ashes cricket, and I think that probably carried on through generations in the fact that when young kids were watching 05, they got inspired by your Flintoffs, your KPs, your Vaughans. And it's sort of continued on through Ashes cricket going forward. There's a great circus, there's a great energy around Ashes series weeks before they arrive. You know, the players will talk, the media will talk, Glenn McGrath will come out and say 5-0. I think that just builds up such great emotion for when the series finally gets underway.
So interesting hearing from Stuart Broad and Shane Warne about the importance of the Ashes to them and to so many other people as well. Now, don't forget, you can also watch this podcast on YouTube on the Analyst Inside Cricket channel. If you Google the Analyst, it'll come up and you can actually relive some of those great moments and see that our interviewers are actually on camera as well. So go to the Analyst Inside Cricket YouTube channel to watch. So, Simon, we should talk about our first experiences of the Ashes. What's your first memory of it?
I remember 74-5, I think, the most vividly, the first memory. I do remember the 72 series, which was a 2-2 draw in England retaining the Ashes. But 74-5, there was something magical about it. And we've done a podcast series about 1974-5. It was the first series where you would wake up at 4-5 in the morning, turn your radio on, hope to wake up at 4-5 in the morning, which I always did because I knew the cricket was on. And you would wake up, you had no idea what was going on in the series in Australia because there were no phones, there was no teletext. Those people remember that. There was no way of staying in touch. There was no through-the-night TV coverage. There was just radio coverage, 2 hours, the last session of each day's play. So when you woke up, you didn't know what to expect. As it transpired, what you did find out was that Australia were absolutely dominating England, and Thompson and Lilly were wanging it around England's ear holes and knocking them over and winning the series comfortably. But there was something just magical about being transported that distance, those thousands of miles to Australia, a place I'd never been, never thought I would go to hear about an Ashes series. It was incredibly special, even though the news for England supporters every day was pretty dreary.
Yeah, of course. Actually, my first memory was 1968, when I was only about 9, and I remember being in a friend's house and the Ashes was on telly in the summer, the 1968 series, and Colin Cowdrey, who was my early hero as a Kent fan, was holding up his bat, raising his bat for 100 in his 100th test. He, of course, was the first cricketer to play 100 test matches, and he raised his bat for 100, and I always tried to practice raising my bat ever after that. Not that I ever scored 100 in any decent cricket, but, it was a nice idea, I suppose. That 68 series, Underwood bowling Australia out right at the end of the series on a wet wicket where all the crowd ran on and helped to dry the pitch to enable a finish. And then from then on, really, I followed, Ashes series pretty much throughout. I was lucky enough to cover the 1986-7 Ashes series, which, of course, Mike Gatting's team won. And it was, a rare occasion, of course, when England won the Ashes in Australia. And it was then 18 years to 2005 when they could have a chance of winning it again. There was a series of about 8 Ashes series which they lost. And I actually wrote a book sort of chronicling this series from 86-7, Mike Gatting's series, to the 2005 Ashes, sort of bookending England's successes with lots of failures in the middle there. Morning Everyone, and Ashes Odyssey. And, you know, the Ashes generally do have this incredible resonance. We've got the Ashes urn here. Now, this is a replica, of course, of the real urn, which is still in the Lord's Museum and never leaves it, although it has on occasion been on tour to Australia because they've won it so many times. They got
a bit annoyed, didn't they, that they couldn't actually have the Ashes urn, but it belongs to the Lord's Museum and it's too valuable to
move out and too fragile
often, yeah.
actually as well. So have you ever held one?
I haven't, no. What are you supposed to do with it? Do what David Gower did at the Oval in whatever it was, 1985, like that, was it?
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, they kiss it as well, don't they? But
yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
it's very light, isn't it?
It's very light, and this is an exact replica. It's about 6 inches tall. It looks like something that your grandmother has on her dresser somewhere. It looks like it's a fairly useless thing, but of course the key to it is what's inside, and no one really quite knows what's inside in the original. They've X-rayed it a few times, but all it shows is there's something in the bottom, a bit of debris in the bottom. It could be a burnt bale, it could be a burnt veil, a lady's veil, because of course it was presented to the honorary Ivo Bligh, the England captain in Australia in 1882, with the idea that this was the Ashes of English cricket that they could try and win back. And it ended up on Ivo Bligh's mantelpiece in England until about the 1920s, and then was presented to the MCC, where it's remained ever since. It's supposed to contain this remnants of a bale or the ashes of a bale of some kind, but it's hard to prove. But it's a symbol, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the symbol which is most important, and I suppose it's why the Ashes is so intriguing, because it goes back to 1882. So there've been before 2005 was 120 odd years of Ashes contests every 2 years, apart from during the First and Second World Wars. They've always played it. It has that sort of cultural significance. It's beyond just sport. Intransigent fathers against impudent sons. It's Northern Hemisphere against Southern Hemisphere. It's old world v new world. There's so many kind of cultural essences to it. Of course, it's the oldest sporting international contest still going as well. So there are so many aspects to it. And what does it mean to you? Is there anything that, did you ever kind of grow up thinking, I want to play in the Ashes?
No, I didn't, because you never thought you'd be good enough to do so. I never did. Well, you might have done, did you?
I did, yeah. Botham's Ashes, 1981.
You thought I might be able to have a go one day?
Well, I was lucky enough to get into a test trial, actually, that summer when they were looking for another fast bowler, because there were a few. Chris Old, I think, had broken down, and there were a couple of others. Bob Willis had a shaky sort of fitness period, so they were looking for a fourth fast bowler, and a few of us were trialled in this particular match. Paul Allott came through it and played in the fourth test at Old Trafford in 81. So, yeah, I was close, but not close enough.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda, I don't know. Yeah. Look, it's just an incredible sporting contest, isn't it? I think it lost some of its lustre for English supporters during that period when Australia was so dominant, because you could never see England winning the Ashes again. I remember watching Shane Warne bowl the ball of the century at Old Trafford, watching it on television, and thinking, oh, that's the Ashes for the next decade, gone as far as England are concerned. You've got a bloke who can do that. Come on and do that. What havoc is he going to wreak? I don't even then. I don't think he you imagine that he was going to do what he did over the years. But you realise that there was something special there, and you thought, wow, good luck England for a long time. So I think there was that period where it just felt kind of impossible for England. They were so good, Australia, and that is why 2005, I think, is such a special series. Not only because the cricket was fantastic, but because you had this superstar team that were not made to look ordinary, but an England team actually competed against them. And England, of course, could have lost that series. Easily lost it, couldn't they? It could have gone either way. And I think that's what made it so special. Each day, each match, you just didn't quite know what was going to happen.
Yeah, well, that's why we've called this first episode Twilight of the Gods, because it was very much that incredibly dominant Australian series visiting England. It was possibly the swan song of some of those great players, Hayden, Langer, Warne, McGrath. It was certainly the English swan song for those players. And one player who was involved on the English side, who was only young actually in 2005, but had a big impact on the Ashes, he's one of the only England captains who's ever won the Ashes both home and away, Andrew Strauss. Here, he just reflects on the importance of the Ashes to him.
I think from a cricketer's perspective, it is the Test series on which you're judged. In the same way as a white ball cricketer, it might be a World Cup. In Test cricket, it is all about the Ashes. This is a sort of zero-sum game. You either finish the Ashes as a hero and your reputation is hugely enhanced, or you finish it as a loser and a zero. But then I think when you look at it through the other lens, which is supporters, I think it is one of the iconic sporting contests. It's a good-natured rivalry against Australia, the like of which we have in all sports, but in cricket it's sort of accentuated to one degree or another. And it is a series that evolves, and obviously we know any Test series sort of ebbs and flows, but over the 5 Test matches of an Ashes, it gives time for narratives to build and storylines to emerge, and a lot of interest and entertainment and excitement. And I think, and of course, there's the link with history. There's the link with all those previous battles and all those great stories that have emerged from them. So I think in terms of cricketing, it just whets the appetite. It captures the imagination of cricket fans in this country, and of course, to one degree or another, all around the world as well. So I've always enjoyed that rivalry. I've enjoyed their company. I've enjoyed the Australian attitude towards cricket, and I also enjoy the challenge of, that they play the game in a very sort of in-your-face, hard style.
So, of course, Andrew Strauss was a real key for the Ashes going forwards, and actually he played a big part in this 2005 series. But England's attitude was really driven by Michael Vaughan in 2005. He'd experienced playing in Australia, and he'd experienced dueling with these greats, these Australian greats, and realised the only way to take them on was to be aggressive yourself.
I realised as soon as I got the captaincy in 2003, myself and Duncan Fletcher, we had a vision that by 2005 we really needed a fresher set of players to take on Australia, because a lot of legendary England players had so much damage mentally done to them by the Aussies in the 90s and the early 2000s that we were willing to go with a fresher set of players and minds to try and take them on, and also to have an aggressive set of players. The only way I felt you could beat that Aussie team is almost taking them on with their own game.
I suppose 2 other reasons, Simon, why 2005 was such an iconic series was, firstly, it was the last summer of Test cricket on terrestrial TV. Channel 4, which I was part of, was covering it. Of course, I was stuck in a truck for most of that series, or all of that series. People sometimes would say, let him out into the sunlight, because I was stuck in a VT truck.
That'd be too gruesome for everybody, that would.
Yeah, I know. I had a few much less polite things than that as well. Like, why don't they just lock the caravan up and throw away the key, all you and your silly drawings and things like that. But I did have some fun, actually, bits of
What were you
telestration.
trying to do? Explain to people what you were trying to do in that truck.
Well, demystify the game, I suppose.
401 Test wickets for Curtly Ambrose, and let's see how accurate he is. A lot of bowlers practice, or used to practice, by putting a handkerchief on the area of the pitch where they were trying to practice the ball. I've drawn my impression of a handkerchief, and this is a hole over from Ambrose. See how accurate he is. That one first to Hick, he pushed away on the leg side. Again, the second ball to Vaughan also landed in the same spot, and he pushed it around the offside. The third one again landing in that little square, and the fourth one, good technique by Hick there, just watching the ball to see if it will extra bounce, and then another one. So 5 have all landed in that little area.
Explain what was going on. It was the first time really that anyone had sat down and looked at all the VT angles. There were so many camera angles of that summer, that series, probably 30 cameras, and each camera manned by somebody in the truck who had replay, a machine that could replay each moment. And so I was sort of surrounded by screens and pick out little moments to try and explain them in a bit more detail, show how Shane Warne was getting his wickets, how he was moving a bat around the crease, or why Peterson's aggressive methods were more effective because he was coming at the bowlers. Little field setting strategies, McGrath's brilliance on the Lord's slope, for instance, and how he utilised the slope to make the ball move one way and then the other. So I was just trying to get into the detail. And of course, we had commercial breaks in between overs, but they kindly allowed me once every 3 overs to say something in between overs. And you had a 30-second break. So there was scope to just try and explain the game and, I don't know, draw people in.
Is that because you had you thought you had a new audience?
Yes, I think so. I think that's right. I mean, the BBC, who you of course have worked for all your life, really, they'd had the coverage since before that, to 99. And when Channel 4 got the coverage, we tried to use a few tools and things like Hawkeye, things like very super slow motion. Snickometer was also introduced around that time. Hawkeye, as I say, was one of the first things, sort of new innovations we brought in. And we were just trying to, entertain people, explain the game, explain the detail, explain the strategy, and basically try and attract a new audience, as you say, because we felt cricket had such a compelling narrative all the time. And we were lucky that this series was so successful in its ebbs and flows and its drama that more and more people tuned in during the summer.
So you didn't watch a single ball of the series kind of live? You didn't sort of go to the stand and watch it for a bit?
That's a good question. I sometimes sat for the first 20 minutes of a morning outside just to sort of take in the atmosphere and get a bit of sunshine. And then after that, I was in the dark room for the rest of the day. So, I could say, truthfully, I probably watched every ball from 12 different angles.
Yeah. I mean, I watched every ball of the series. We might be two of the only people on the planet, possible, there might be others as well, who actually watched every single ball of the series, because I had a bizarre interaction with the 2005 Ashes. I was working for the Vodafone highlights, so that was basically highlights on your phone in those days. I think we could send out 4 per hour, something like that. We did a roundup at lunchtime and tea time, and at the end of the day's play, like a minute and a half or 2 minutes roundup. So I was a bit like you, sitting in a booth with someone cutting the clips, and I was then voicing them up soon after the incident happened, or as soon as possible after the incident happened, and then it was sent out to your phone if you're a Vodafone customer. So you get a little alert, there's a wicket and you can actually watch it there with my commentary on it. So that was my bizarre interaction with the Ashes, but it meant that I had to watch every single ball, and of course, just about every single ball in that series was utterly compelling.
Yeah. Of course, those are the days before iPhones as well. So we were on the flip phones or the Motorola phones or something like that, but you still could watch it. So interesting. One other thing just to mention about this memorable series that made it really distinctive, it was Richie Benaud's last series commentating in England. And he'd been commentating on cricket in England since the 1960s, since the mid-60s. Australian captain, superb all-rounder, leg spinner. He came into commentary really quite quickly after retiring and had been part of the furniture on BBC ever since the 60s, commentating on all those highlights and on all those live games.
Big hit. Say goodnight.
And so this was his last series commentating on English cricket. And he put everything into it. He turned up really early. He put his little nest in the corner of the commentary box of his laptop and his racing post. He couldn't be done without his racing post and his little Tupperware of sandwiches that he always made, because he didn't like to miss a ball. So he would be there. He wouldn't want to go out for lunch or anything. He'd sit there in the commentary box, just, carefully watching every ball. He was able to see things out of the corner of his eye, even though he seemed to be actually looking at his laptop. He didn't miss a thing. And in a way, he was a bit of a mentor of mine as well. He was the person who encouraged me in the 90s when he was at the BBC to say, get into a bit more detail. I want to know about reverse swing or, certain batting techniques or whatever. Tell me more and make some features about it. So in a way, he encouraged me to try to become the analyst. And actually, the book I wrote was almost a sort of homage to him because he was such an influence.
Did you have a bit of pushback because you didn't play Test cricket and you were going on TV and saying, this is happening, that's happening, perhaps they should try this, perhaps they should try that, and people say, well, what does he know about it? He didn't play at this level. Did people say that to you?
No, he didn't actually. Well, some people, Boycott probably did, but he didn't say it to me actually personally, but probably they thought it. But Benaud never did. Benaud was always intrigued by the detail of the game, and he didn't really understand reverse swing. So he'd say, tell me about reverse swing. I called it reverse swing. Tell me about reverse swing again. And I wrote an article about it in the Telegraph, which he actually said he kept in his briefcase, forever, sort of to refer to. So he was a wonderful inspiration, actually. And what he said to me right at the end of the series, I mean, we'll come to this when we get to episode 6, which is the final test, but he said to me at the end of the series when I said, thank you for all you've done for me. And he just said, it's been wonderful, Simon, to work with someone who's always thinking. So that was as good a compliment. I'll have that on my gravestone for sure. That was just such a huge compliment from the great man.
I'll just make a note of that for future reference.
We'll just take a quick break, and afterwards we'll come to why this Australian side was so good and what England were going to do about it in 2005.
So for those who can't remember, what was it about this Australian side? Okay, they'd won 8 series in a row against England, and they'd won, so 4 series in England, and they'd hammered England, hadn't they, really? There was one series in 97 where they won 3-2, and England won the first test, and that led to a huge sense of optimism among England supporters, but then Australia crushed that by, winning 3 more, and England won the final one, so it was 3-2. But the other series have been so one-sided. Started with Alan Border's team in 1989 when they won 4-0. What was it about this Australian side? Why were they so good? How did they find a team like this? Because they've always been good. We know, we've done podcasts in the past where we've analysed that Australian cricket has been, generally speaking, strong for 100-odd years, ever since the game has been played. But what was it about this team?
Well, I think actually it started in the 86-7 series when Mike Gatting's team went to Australia and they won for the first time for 15 years, and they won against the odds, really. There was that famous quote from Martin Johnson, the independent journalist, who said England only had 3 problems: they can't bat, they can't bowl, and they can't field. That was before the first test, and of course they won the series, so he had to eat his words. But after that, the Aussies focused on their own game, and they developed the Australian Cricket Academy under the likes of Rod Marsh. It was where Shane Warne first emerged, and Glenn McGrath as well. And I think that team from sort of 97 onwards, or even before that, was a product of the Australian Academy. It was set up in Adelaide. It brought in all the sort of greats of the past to come and help, Dennis Lilly and people like that, to give their input and give their expertise. And this young group of really ambitious young players, led by Warne and McGrath, Ricky Ponting, Hayden, Langer, etc. Those guys all came through that academy. And by the sort of mid-90s, they were really emerging as a force. And of course, it was in the mid-90s, actually, that Australian team, which at the time was led by Mark Taylor, beat the West Indies that was by then led by the Richie Richardson just after Viv Richards had retired, that beat the West Indies for the first time. They hadn't been beaten for 15 years in a series. So it was a sort of handing over of the power of the game in that mid-90s. And they just battered everybody. And of course, they won 2 World Cups as well. They won the 99 and the 2003 World Cups. And they just evolved this intimidatory batting unit led by Hayden and Langer with Ponting and others. And of course, Gilchrist to come in and smash them everywhere when the team was either struggling or the bowlers against them were struggling. And then this great bowling attack led by Warne and McGrath. So first we hear Glenn McGrath on the 11 match winners that he felt he was taking the field with. And then we hear Adam Gilchrist and Justin Langer talking about that really imposing batting order that they were part of.
Most teams have 1 or 2 players that can win games for them. I felt we had 11. And when you've got that, then you're going to win more times than not, and it gives you a lot of confidence. So, you look at the openers we've had, or that I played with, started with Slats, Michael Slater, Mark Taylor, and then obviously finishing up with Matthew Hayden, Justin Langer. Booney was number 3 when I first started, then Ricky Ponting towards the end. And then you've got the Wars, you've got Damien Martin, that middle order, Mike Hussey, world beaters as well. But one of the things that I thought really made our team stand out was Adam Gilchrist coming in at 7. You've got Gilly coming in at 7. If he bats any time at all, he either gets you back into the game or takes the game away from the opposition. And no, I didn't think any other team had the luxury of someone like that coming in at number 7. I think the bowlers that we had allowed us to take 4 bowlers into a game and felt that was plenty to take 20 wickets, which meant that we could strengthen our batting lineup. We didn't really need that all-rounder that a lot of teams talk about, and maybe you class Gilly as our all-rounder. So, there was no weak point there. I always felt if we won the toss and bowled, it's going to be at least might go into the 4th day, but if we batted first, if we lost the toss and bowled first, I always thought 3-day test.
Yeah, I think whereas particularly the most significant part of my career, the opening partnership, was obviously Hayden and Langer, and Justin loved the Rocky Balboa music type thing on the underdog. He'd be doing his little dancing with the pads on, and almost shadow boxing to fire himself up and get the feet moving. And whereas Haydos's was more a mindset. It was more, you knew that he was not so much a physical movement in the change room, but just a calmness. You could see him almost trying to get himself into this Zen-like state where he wanted to go out there and he'd go out there and go through his routines of grounding himself, touching the ground and squatting down and looking around. And he really, really, I think, tempted the opposition to come inside his mindset. That was, trying to lure them in there. But then obviously when he is at the crease, and it's something I remember opening the batting with him in one-day cricket, just such an intimidating figure. The size of him just looks so dominant standing there, the barrel chest. It was quite a sight, and it must have been intimidating for an opponent to see that. So he cast his presence on the opposition, both physically and mentally, and didn't mind throwing a chirp or two out there pretty early just to get engaged in the battle, which wasn't the way I've operated. But in Test cricket, I don't think Justin minded either, because it lit it up, and that's where the competitive juices were flowing. But the belief and confidence that we all gained from that was quite extraordinary. And none the least because you could see, you had a first-hand view of the opposition and their body language and how stunned and shocked they were. So he had a tremendous amount of belief in himself, really did.
It was like batting with Russell Crowe, the gladiator. And I always say Haydos is a knob. Like, in Gladiator, Russell Crowe, before he'd go out to fight, he'd bend down, he'd pick up the dirt, he'd rub it on his hands, and then he'd go and he'd take on the world. Well, Haydos used to get down, rub his hand on the grass, rub them together, go, let's go. Like, what a knob. Seriously, he thought he was the gladiator, and he was so different to me. He's about 6'5", I'm about 5'5", and he was just so, he just had this presence, and he honestly was like walking out back with a giant. There would be times when Matty Hayden, we'd play Pakistan, right? And without doubt, the fastest bowler in the world in our time was Shoaib Akhtar. No question. Not even Jermaine Lawson had one series where he bowled really fast, but Shoaib Akhtar. So Haydos, he'd walk, and I always took the first ball. So I'd always say I was the tough one, he was the soft one. I always took the first ball. We would walk out, play Pakistan, and Haydos would walk straight to Shoaib Akhtar. And he'd be going, mate, blah, 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 and whatever he'd say to Shoaib to get him angry. And I'd go, Haydos, what are you doing? I've got to face him, mate. Like, he's going, no, you know what it's like. We get him angry and he bowls rubbish, he gets loose. So Haydos would be just, but at Shoaib Akhtar, and we're trying to bowl faster and faster. But Haydos did not care, mate. He had this presence, and he had this he had good strategy, and he'd just wind them up. He'd wind up the ball, he'd wind up the opposition. And then, we had very different styles. He'd be standing there banging them straight back down the ground. I'd be hitting him behind point, behind square leg. So I think because of that, that made us hard to bowl to as a partnership. But we enjoyed each other's company. We never talked serious out in the middle. We never talked cricket out in the middle. It was always just, we're pretty chilled. And then we went about our business when they started bowling to us.
Ponting with 3, just, the best I played with. Don't care to get into the argument about whether he's the best that I played against as well, but he's certainly in the discussion, and just so reliable. I think so inspirational in his ability to be up for a challenge. So I think even just his body language drew teammates along with him. And that's not necessarily his captain, just from his batsmanship and his desire to get into the fight. Ricky was, as I say, inspirational in the way he would take it on the other way. He'd sort of walk into the fire and expect that he's going to benefit from it by coming out the other side and then putting into whatever he went through into practice out, in the middle. And he probably knew it was unlikely he was going to be confronted with anything more challenging out in the middle against the opposition that were around, having taken on that quality of bowlers in the nets in the toughest conditions. Sporting net practice with brand new balls, probably overstepping by about half a metre. So that was his character in everything he does. He just sort of looks it in the eye and takes it on. So, yeah.
It just came together. And then you got Gilchrist coming in at 7, like Christ. Well, there was times when we were 5 for 40, and an hour and a half later we were 5 for 200. So there was the freaks like Martin, and there was the freaks like Gilchrist, and probably like Ricky Ponting. But I just think it was the culmination of experience and confidence coming together at the right time.
So we've talked a lot about the Australian batting and the intimidatory batting, and of course they changed the tempo of the game in the same way as England have recently with Bazball. They were sort of early Bazballers because they were hitting it at 4 and over, weren't they, in the sort of early 2000s, and just taking bowling teams on and really imposing themselves on it. And it started with Hayden and Langer, didn't it? But I even sort of watched it slightly kind of feeling intimidated just on the telly.
Well, they were incredibly intimidating, but I just wonder, was there real strength actually in their bowling? Okay, they had this gun batting line. I suppose you could say they had both, didn't they? That was what made them so great. And they had Gilchrist as well, who was this brilliant all-rounder. He was the all-rounder. But they probably couldn't have done it without the bowlers. I mean, do you subscribe? You probably do, actually, as an old bowler, that bowlers win matches. I remember my old coach at school used to say batters draw matches, bowlers win matches. I think it might be a bit simplistic. I put that to Jeffrey once, and he said, "No, that's rubbish, lad. It's rubbish." But there is an element of truth. The bowlers knock you over. You need the 20 wickets to win.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the batters set up victory and the bowlers clinch it, don't they? You've got to get 20 wickets. And Australia was so lucky that they had 2 bowlers that you could totally bank on all the time. They were immaculate in any condition. So McGrath, the opening bowler, 6'6", a relentless, robotic, fast medium bowler who hated batsmen, and he hated giving them any runs at all. So he just kind of imposed this sort of incredible pressure on batters. And then Warne, who could bowl in any conditions, and he had all these deliveries. Of course, he had the leg spinner and the googly and the flipper and the slider and so on. But that was all within this blanket of accuracy. So he never actually let a batter get away.
That was the key with him, wasn't it? I think lots of people had these skills as leg break bowlers, but he had accuracy as well as skill.
Yeah, and if you look at his economy rate, to use a sort of modern term, it was only about 2.5 per over. And that's incredibly low for the art of leg spin, which is so difficult to control. Spinning the ball, wrist spin, is a fickle art that only a few people have mastered over the generations, and Warne, obviously, the foremost amongst them. So between them, they would impose this blanket of accuracy, which batters just couldn't extricate themselves from. And Warne spun this sort of sticky web, which batsmen just got completely glued into and eventually tried to break out of and usually got out. So it was amazing to watch. Lovely for Adam Gilchrist, who kept wicket to both of these great bowlers, to experience it. And he really treasures the memory of that.
Well, it was a highlight of my cricketing career, without doubt, full stop, to wicketkeeper Shane Warne, and then finish that over and go and stand up there with Shane Warne next to me at first slip and wicketkeeper Glenn McGrath. It really is the most fun aspect of the game of cricket that I can remember. Just to be so deeply involved and so engaged in their craftsmanship and their skill and the way they went about it, and knowing where they fit in, cricket history. And it was, they achieved a huge amount before I even was able to get my hands into the wicket-keeping gloves in Test cricket. I'd had the taster in one-day cricket, but you knew their greatness and you could feel it, and it was just extraordinary how in situations in games where it did feel like, hang on, we are on 50-50, we're on even par here with the opposition. We didn't expect to be, or someone's played a big innings, or something hasn't gone our way. But just so how consistently one of those two would just take it by the scruff of the neck and just turn it around. And if one of them did it, the other one was always very close behind to capitalising on that little opening. And before you knew it, the opposition must have just sat there and thought, hang on, we were in this before that spell. But, they'd work in tandem together. Really different characters, chalk and cheese, really, their personalities and what their interests were off the field, but had a deep respect for each other and an understanding of probably their genius, each other's genius, and they complement each other beautifully. But
McGrath was a country boy from New South Wales, and he was just hardwired into giving a batter absolutely nothing. And he talks about his upbringing and what he was always looking to do.
So if you look at my action, I didn't bowl 100 mile an hour. I didn't run in 100 mile an hour either, and big delivery stride. It was all
I was measured, really, wasn't it?
I always thought I was working hard, but my goal was not to. I guess I learnt a lot listening to people saying you've got to swing the ball, and I wasn't a big swinger of the ball, and I started to swing, bowl out big outswingers. And my first Ashes Test match in 94, 95, first of all time for me, I was bowling big outies and finished the figures none for 120. So I stopped listening to people and went back to why I got picked in the first place, which was, I had good bounce, could bowl good areas, and I get a bit of movement off the seam. So I just thought, and talking to guys like, Lara, Tendulkar, our boys, all the great batsmen, they always said it's harder facing someone bowling, say, mid to high 130s who gets bounce off a length rather than someone who skids a ball on at 150 k's an hour. So I just thought, okay, that's my strength. I'm tall, I can bowl, I can get bounce, I've got control, and I get a movement off the pitch. So I thought, how can I maximise that? And I just thought, if I stay as tall as I can and then really drive through the crease, I found that I got more bounce, and that got me a lot of wickets. So I think I was physically fit and strong, but I always said my strength was the mental side of the game. I always had a certain amount of self-belief. I guess having that control allowed me to set aggressive field, so if they made a mistake, they're out. I look at Wazzy Makram was an incredible bowler. I look at Jimmy Anderson. Those guys probably have more skill in their little finger than I have in my whole body. But what I did very well, and I couldn't think, couldn't understand why you'd bowl a ball where the batsman wanted it, and why you'd put a fieldsman for a bad delivery. I thought, what's the point of bowling a bad delivery? So I just worked on just keeping it there, building pressure, and not giving them any easy runs or any let off at all. But you need to bowl in partnerships for that to be really effective.
I remember watching Glenn McGrath right at the start of his Test career. It was a Test match in Brisbane in the 94-95 Ashes series. He was picked for Australia. He was a rookie bowler, and he didn't bowl particularly well. I think he didn't bowl in the style that he wanted to bowl in. So you talked about the relentless style. I think he went away from that in that Test match. He went around the park a little bit. Australia won the match. And I remember the embryonic Barmy Army were gathered in Brisbane for that match, and they were singing to him, "You're the worst bowler in the world." And it's incredible to think that now, isn't it? When you think of what he achieved in the game. And I think it's fair to say Glenn didn't take very kindly to that. And he gave them a particular gesture. And I just remember so clearly that and thinking, I wonder how this is going to pan out. He didn't bowl very well in the series, and he was being barracked by the England bowlers. But I think it's fair to say he pretty much had the final say, or every say, just about after that.
Yeah, and actually, funnily enough, the place he loved playing the most was Lord's, which was perfectly set up. And we can come to this in episode 2, because that was the first Test at Lord's. But he just was a master of maintaining this robotic, metronomic line and length approach at Lord's. And the Lord's slope helped him take wickets there in bundles. But also, he never got out at Lord's either. He was the worst batter in the world. He was a real resident number 11. And he never got out at Lord's. So he claims that he's got not only the lowest bowling average at Lord's, but also the highest batting average, ironically.
So he was one of the worst batters in the world. The Barmy Army, if they chanted that, they would have been right. But he was actually one of the greatest bowlers ever to have lived.
Yeah, he took in the end 563 Test wickets, which has only been overtaken by fast bowlers, Jimmy Anderson and Stuart Broad, in the last few years. And of course, he says in that interview, doesn't he, that he felt he could only achieve what he achieved in partnership with somebody else. And so together, he and Warne took 1,000 wickets between them in Test cricket, which again has only just been recently overtaken by Stuart Broad and Jimmy Anderson. So, McGrath definitely paying tribute to Warne. And here's Shane Warne, the late Shane Warne, how we miss him so much since he passed away. But here he is talking about how he learned the art of leg spin.
I think when I first sort of tried it, when I must have been 9 or 10, the hardest thing is getting the technique of how to bowl a leg break and then being able to spin it. Some people can bowl it out the back of the hand, but they can't spin it. So I just had this natural gift I could spin it. And I think because I grew up on matting, it was accentuated too, because everything it bounced more, it spun more, whatever you did, it did it more. So I think that, thinking back, it's sort of 30 years ago, it sort of excited me to say, oh, wow, look at that, that's pretty cool. Where if I suppose I tried to bowl it and it didn't really spin much, it wouldn't have really intrigued me. But to see it spin and then try and make it go the other way and do other things with it and watching what it did, it was like, it got me curious.
Well, I'd say the long spells wasn't because I did laps and laps around the block. I spent hours in the gym. That was more just will and more, I was lucky, I suppose. I had that endurance naturally. It didn't mean I didn't get tired. Of course I got tired. But just a positive and strong mind, I think. The more you say to yourself, I'm tired, I'm knackered here, it's very hard to get yourself up there. I just wanted that. I was so competitive and wanted to win that I couldn't afford to, just drop off. So I suppose I was lucky in that regard that I was strong mentally to just to keep going. I wasn't so I was lucky that I suppose my arms and that I'm quite big naturally up top. And I think one of the reasons why strong wrists and forearms is I had 2 broken legs as a kid, and I had to get round on a trolley, and I had plaster from here to my ankles with a couple of holes in it, and I had to get round a trolley for 12 months, and I think that gave me strong hands and wrists and forearms, which I think with my natural, I suppose, strong upper body, just naturally strong, then that probably helped. And I had a very interesting conversation with Viv Richards in New Zealand recently. We're playing in the New Zealand Open, and we had a car drive for about 45 minutes to an hour back to our hotel, and we're chatting, and I said, mate, how did you guys all get along in your team? He said, no way, man, no way. He goes on. He said, no, we didn't, and there was often disagreements and all those sorts of things. But we had so many good players that we never really spoke about it, but everyone just did their thing and wanted to be great. They wanted to be the best they could be. You have to have a happy dressing room to perform the best when you haven't got great cricketers all the time. It's a really important thing. When you've got great cricketers about there, it's all about getting those guys to be the best they can be all the time and perform. We just trusted each other to do their thing. And no matter who we played, we always thought, I think all of us always thought we'd win no matter what, because that was just our culture. That was just our attitude. We always thought we could win no matter who we played. That's why you always hear McGrath, well, what do you think? We'll go, oh, we'll win 5-0. Because he never thought he'd lose a game. Not because it was being an arrogant. He just said because that was his mindset. We're not going to lose.
Yeah, if Shane's got a hold over someone, I'm not giving any easy runs. And the batsmen are thinking, where's the next run coming from? And, Shane, he had all the skills. You could read him, but the thing with Warne, he was so consistent. He could actually land the ball exactly where he wanted it to. And, I think and sort of so many incredible memories off the field, but probably even more so on the field. And, when we played together in test matches, most of the time we won. It was an incredible era of Australian cricket. And so, I think it was 101 tests we played. We took over 1,000 wickets together. And, I'm quite proud of that. And I know Shane was as well.
So hopefully you get a sense of how good this team, this Australian team was, listening to them talking about themselves and the confidence that they had, of course, as well. How were England going to combat that? Michael Vaughan, of course, was captain. Duncan Fletcher taken over as coach as well in the late 90s. And then Michael Vaughan had taken over as captain in 2003. And he, brought together a new bunch of players that were perhaps untarnished by the Ashes. That was the important thing, really, and untarnished by awful experiences in the Ashes, which he remembered himself from 2002, from his own first experience of the Ashes in 2002, which, almost never got going. I think Vaughan felt when he got to Australia in 2002 that almost the reputations of these Australian players were so powerful that England, there was hardly any point in turning up. So he reminisces on the experience of that 2002 tour and what it meant to him and how he was able to bring in new styles of captaincy as a result of that experience.
And I asked some of the senior batters, how's it facing Glenn McGrath? And they were like, oh, God, you put a 1p piece down, he'll hit it with a new ball, kookaburra, he'll swing it away from your right, the right-hander, particularly you, Vaughan, he said, and then he'll bowl the same length, he'll nip it back, and when he bowls the bounce, it'll be right on the money. It'd be right on the 3 lines. I went, oh, shit, that sounds quite interesting. So I then asked about Shane Warne. I said, well, that combination, it's such a strong one. What's that like? And then one of the other senior players said, oh, it's, he's got about 15 deliveries, zooters, hooters, grooters. He chirps you all day long. You got Hayden in front of you, Ponting. Gilchrist doesn't say a lot from behind the stump. Steve Ward just snails at you and kind of spits on you. I kind of looked at him and went, fucking hell, what are we getting on this plane for? We've got no chance. To that first test in Brisbane, I just felt that so intimidating. The anthems. It was the first time I'd walked out to do the anthems, and then you go back in the dressing room. It was an experience that first week, and it's easy for me a few years later to say, look, you look the Aussies in the eye, and you kind of just play the ball, not the name. But I'll be honest, in that first test in Brisbane, I remember looking over to the Aussies and seeing Warne, Ponting, Warne, McGrath, Gillespie, Brett Lee, and I was thinking, oh my God, these are a serious cricket team. And not just a serious cricket team, they had the psyche. They had the psyche and the body language that they just looked down on us. They really did look down at all the England players, as if to say, we think you're shit. I found it very intimidating in the field because I was a useless fielder, so it didn't take much to intimidate me, but they were intimidating. That Hayden-Langer combination at the top, they ran out from the dugout and it was like, oh, they come. I remember Craig White in Melbourne. He was bowling 92 miles an hour reverse swingers. And he was bowling around the wicket to Hayden, and we went for the 7-2 offside field. Well, this is what we'll do. We'll stop him scoring. Brilliant idea, great. And it's reverse swinging away from Hayden. And Chalky, I'm at mid-on, straight mid-on. I think we've got a square leg or just in front of square on the boundary. So they're the 2 fielders on the onside. And Chalky ran in, charged in, and he bowls a 92 miles an hour, a reverse swinging beauty, wide of off stump. Matthew Hayden just drop-kicked him over my head for 6. Chalky walks back to me and went, fucking, that's my best delivery, that. I mean, you couldn't make it up. They were that good at intimidating. Even if you were bowling well, and even if you did have good plans, they would just try and dismantle them. They knew what you were trying to do.
So Michael Vaughan, of course, took over as England captain in 2003, and I think that experience of touring Australia in 2002 left a huge imprint on his captaincy methods.
Everything that I learned on that tour was why I was the captain I was, really. And the lesson that I learned in Sydney in the last test, that we were 4-0 down and we went to Sydney. And we win the toss, we bat, and we get half decent. I think Butch gets a really good 100. I don't know, we got 350 odd. So we're in the game because we've got 350. It's not a massive score, but and we got a couple of early wickets, and all of a sudden I started to see a batting team for the first time under pressure. And our bowlers, Caddick, I think Big Steve Palmerston played, I think Hoggy was playing. I think it was level pegging after the first inning. I went and batted in the second and managed to get a big 100, but it just told me that it doesn't matter who you play against, if you can get runs on the board and you can put them under a bit of gas with a number on the board and play in a sense of positivity, because it was like a bit of a freedom to us to go and play with positivity. Everyone felt from that experience of playing well in Sydney and seeing the Australians lose. You know, we saw them lose a game of cricket, which was unheard of, really. If you think about the start of that 2-2, 2-3 series, and it taught me a great lesson that, you know, if you play hard cricket and you get in their faces and you get a score on the board and you're really positive in everything that you do, and you stay together and you really, you know, together in the field and you're chirping and you know really working as a unit, you can beat anybody. Test match in Sydney was kind of a mentality reminder to me that, you know, a group of 11 people that plays the right way and is willing to take risks, which we did, you can beat anyone. So we just kind of tried to take that into 2005.
Look, England were pretty ordinary, weren't they, in the late 90s? Duncan Fletcher came in, Nasser Hussain came in, and they revived England's fortunes. What did Michael have that was able to take England on again after Nasser Hussain's relatively successful period as captain?
Well, I think we both know from having worked with him that he's got a lot of ideas, he's got a lot of charisma, and he doesn't lack confidence. And I think the combination of those three things, plus a desire to change the story, to change the narrative, the experience of 2002 and realising actually from that Sydney Test match he talks about in 2002-03, where Australia could be beaten. And this was always his mission as a result. And I think it helped having Duncan Fletcher as his sidekick, who was so good on detail and so good on, you know, philosophy and psychology. And Vaughan was the guy who, man manager, you know, brilliant man manager Vaughan. He knew what would inspire his players, how to manage them, how to get the best out of each individual player. And I think also the other thing is he was calm. He didn't show his emotions too much. Nasser, you know, a strong captain, but at times, you know, wore his heart on his sleeve a bit too much. And I think at times, you know, perhaps just freaked out a few players as well as encouraging them. Whereas Vaughan was just very good at calmly getting the best out of players and not being too flummoxed if things didn't go too well, which of course at Lord's in that first test in 2005, it didn't. And here, just a little tease for the next episode, which of course is that Lord's Test match, the first test of 2005. Here we hear from the Man Mountain, Freddie Flintoff, who was Vaughan's sort of go-to person in that series, a huge build-up. He'd never played in the Ashes before. And here's what he thought. I talked to him 2 days after the end of the Oval Test in that 2005 series. Here's what he thought going into that series.
I've had all the hype for months and months leading up to it. And the closer it was getting, there were a few nerves jangling, but just wanted to get started. It was probably on the first morning when it hit me, the enormity of what we was doing, and I probably built it up a little too much in my mind and put a bit too much pressure on myself.
Don't forget you can watch this on video on YouTube, but next time the action begins, and my God, it was incredible.
All the expectation, build up to this series has been going on now for a good 12 months or more, lots of talk in the press, and now the moment of truth.